Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Sedgemoor District Council's Community Scrutiny Advisory Committee meeting. My name is Councillor Hilary Bruce. I'm chair of the committee. I'm going to hand over now to the committee manager, Andrew Melhuish, for the housekeeping. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon and welcome to the Community Scrutiny Advisory meeting on the 14th of March. Just to say that this meeting is being recorded and a copy of the recording will be made available on the Council's website and also on the Council's YouTube channel. If there are any technical problems, we will pause the meeting, but hopefully everything will be good and steady on the connection today. Just ask everybody to remain on mute during the meeting until they need to speak, and if you do use the hand, hopefully the chair will be able to see that. If not, I'll guide her to get to you in turn to speak at the meeting. So I'll hand back to the chair now just to do some introductions and make sure everybody, all of the councillors on the meeting today are able to see and hear the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. That's fine. So I'm going to go around to each committee member and ask them to introduce themselves, please, and confirm that they can see and hear everything. So Councillor Liz Scott.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. Councillor Liz Scott, Deputy Chairman from the Axe Vale. I can see and hear everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bartlett.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Bartlett from Dunware Ward here. I confirm I can see and hear everything.
Thank you. Councillor Betty. Not seen here yet today. Okay. Councillor Clayton.
Yeah, Councillor Peter Clayton, Burnham-on-Sea North, and yes, I can see and hear everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Crowe. Not here yet. Okay. Councillor Gibson has sent her apologies in via me just prior to the meeting. Councillor Godwin Pearson.
Hello, Graham Godwin Pearson here from Axe Vale. I can see and hear everything in the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Hi, Councillor Harvey, Burnham Central. I can see and hear.
Thank you. Councillor Rodriguez.
Hello, Councillor Rodriguez, Dunware North Ward. I can see and hear clearly. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Wong.
Councillor Gary Wong, for Loft Pemberton, I can see and hear everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's all the committee members today. I'll just say we've got officers with us here today from Sedgemoor. We've got Pete Granger. We have Christy Blackwell with us. Anna Mears, Dorothy O'Farrell for Legal and Governance, and Andrew Melhuish for Democratic Services. We also have some guests with us today from Somerset Western Taunton. We should have Catherine Church and Sue Tomlinson. And we have some guests with us today from Somerset Environmental Records Centre, Leon DeBell, Ellen Philpott and James Duffy. And we also like to welcome Councillor Keane today as portfolio holder for Communities and Wellbeing. Right, so at this point, I think I will go on and go through the agenda. So apologies for absence. I only have apologies from Councillor Gibson, Andrew.
Yes, only apologies received from Councillor Gibson. Not heard anything from Councillor Betty or Councillor Crowe, but they may still join as the meeting progresses.
Chair, can I just say Councillor Betty did contact me earlier saying he might not make it because of the connection issues he was having. So he said if he couldn't make it, send his apologies. I'm assuming he can't make it.
Thank you for letting us know. Thank you. Okay. So the item 2 of the agenda is to agree the minutes of the meeting held on Monday, the 22nd of November as a correct record. Would anybody have any comments on the meeting, on the minutes? No, anybody happy to propose them as a correct record?
Yes, I'm happy.
Thank you, Councillor Clayton. Andrew, do we need a seconder for that, or is that okay as it is?
If there's anybody who dissents, if they would like to say, otherwise we can take that as agreed.
Okay, they'll take that as agreed as a correct record then. Thank you. And item 3, I'm not aware of any urgent business that we need to discuss today.
Oh, that's correct.
Lovely. And as far as I know, we have no public speakers registered to speak today.
That's correct as well, yes.
Perfect, that's item 4. Item 5, any declarations of interest? No, I'll take that as none. Andrew?
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to item 6, which is about the ecological emergency. Members will remember that is something that we have discussed already in the past, and Sedgemoor commissioned a report from SERC, from Somerset Environmental Records Centre, about the state of nature, gathering a local evidence base. We have with us today Catherine Church. Catherine is the Ecological Strategy Project Manager. She works for Somerset Western Taunton Council, delivering the joint Ecological Emergency Strategy and Action Plan for Sedgemoor and Somerset Western Taunton. And we also have Sedgemoor's Pete Granger here, Ecology Officer. So I'm going to hand over to Catherine Church to present this, if that's okay.
Thanks very much, Councillor Bruce. I'm going to talk very briefly, and then I will introduce you to the SERC team. So, as Hilary said, I am the project manager for the ecological strategy. So this is a joint piece of work between Somerset Western Taunton and Sedgemoor. However, this particular piece of work is gathering evidence so that there's a clearer picture on the state of nature in Sedgemoor. So this initial piece of work is being done initially in Sedgemoor, but we will also be doing the same thing for Somerset Western Taunton District too. So without further ado, I will hand over to Leon, who knows a lot more about the ins and outs of this. Just to say that also we aren't at the point where we can make a decision. The work is still being carried out. Our completion date will be the 31st of March. So there's still some work to be done. We're still looking at the data, but we can give you some sort of indications of what's been done so far and where we are to date. So Leon, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks, Catherine. I believe we sent a copy of the presentation through. I was going to ask if it would be possible for who has that to put it up for us, only because James is having some internet issues, so it might be easier if someone at your end can share that for us.
Andrew, are you able to do that for him?
I'm currently having some technical issues here as well, so I was hoping you weren't going to ask.
Okay.
We did our best to make sure we had a backup option, but the backup option isn't working today.
Ellen, are you able to share your screen with the presentation on?
Yeah, I think I can do that. Just 1 second. You'd have to allow me to share.
Okay, just bear with me a second.
Technology is brilliant when it works straight away. Whilst we're waiting for that then, so I'll just introduce myself quickly. So my name is Leon Debelle. I'm the manager of the Somerset Environmental Record Centre. I've been with the Record Centre for coming up 2.5 years now. I had the joy of taking over very, very shortly before the pandemic. So I got to spend a total of about 3 or 4 months in the office with the team before everybody was dispersed and sent home. In that time, there's been quite a lot of change going on within the Record Centre. We've been trying to update and modernise as much as possible. I think this is kind of a general theme, whether it's been with local planning authorities, universities, record centres. We kind of all seem to be at this point where we've gathered so much data and information that we're all rushing to try and collate it and bookmark it in such a way that it's easy to find and work with. And we've been doing the same thing. during that time as well, so with the Wildlife Trust, there's obviously been the new strategy that's come out from Somerset Wildlife Trust, and the Record Centre have been a big part of that. And part of what we're trying to drive from our department is the state of nature, which some of you may have seen the presentations I've given to councillors and the local nature partnership in the past. So this is kind of the first step continuation of that work, and it's a lot more complex than it might seem. We've had a lot of records to kind of dig into and a lot of decisions to make. A lot of the data that we've had collected over the years hasn't really been fit for the purpose of answering some of the questions that we have been asked. So we've been trying to find ways in which we can kind of do that to the best of our ability. So hopefully, once we've got the screen sharing sorted, we'll be able to dive into the presentation and start going through that.
I think access to presenting has been given now.
Okay.
Are you able to present that, Ellen, for Leon?
Not at the moment. Just try again.
Yeah, I don't have access to share either.
Andrew?
Yeah, sorry, I'm having some difficulties with my system here at the moment. But yeah, you should have permission. Everyone's got permission to present, so it has gone through.
Okay, I'm still not getting. Unfortunately, my little button hasn't changed to say that I can share.
I can send it over to Anna Mears, and Anna Mears might be able to present it. Is that okay?
Certainly, if you can try that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sent over my email to you.
Apologies, everyone, for the hiccup. It's technology sometimes won't be controlled.
Hilary, I think our solicitor, Dorothy, had her hand up just now.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't see. Dorothy's not actually
But I
on the screen.
Chair, I lowered my hand because I was going to suggest that someone email the presentation to me, but Ellen beat me to it by suggesting that she send it to a colleague, so that's fine.
Thank you. Yeah, worth noting, I can't always see people's hands up. If people do want to join in, ask a question or debate, it's better if you can put in the chat that you want to speak, because that will come up to me, whereas hands are not always visible.
So I think whilst we're waiting for that, then Ellen, did you want to just quickly introduce yourself, and then James, if you introduce yourself as well, and then hopefully the presentation will pop up and we can get going on it.
Yeah, that's me. Hired to work specifically on the State of Nature report for Sedgemoor and then for Somerset, West and Taunton as well. And I've only recently been working with CERC. But yeah, this is what I've been doing for the last 4 or 5 months, just working on Sedgemoor alone. And that's, yeah, my job.
Hi everyone, I'm James Duffy. I'm the GIS officer at Somerset Wildlife Trust, but I also work with CERC since they're a hosted record centre within the Wildlife Trust. I've been working on some of the landscape and habitat components of the state of nature using GIS and that sort of analysis to bring together some of the broader scale landscape view of what's going on in Sedgemoor. As Ellen said, we'll also be doing a similar report for Somerset, West and Taunton. And producing a kind of document outlining some of the evidence that we found from various data sets. That's me.
Thank you. Anna, did you receive the email with the presentation through yet?
I have. It might be access only, or it says I need permission. I've just messaged Ellen to ask for another copy that I can access, and hopefully very soon can present it.
People have just changed positions on my screen, if that's of any interest to anyone. Something's happening maybe somewhere.
Oh, it's come through. Oh, nearly there.
Thank you, Anna.
Right. Can you see that?
Yeah, that looks good.
Let me know when to.
Yeah, it's coming through now. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Anna, for that.
So I'm going to start off, and then about halfway through, I'll hand over to Ellen. So this presentation comes in two halves, really. The first is the habitats and landscape, which I'm going to cover, and then Ellen's going to talk a bit more about species data. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the three kind of core pillars of the habitats and landscape analysis I've sort of identified are looking at designated sites within Sedgemoor. And the reason that these are important is these are kind of habitats and areas that we assume are of good quality and high value to wildlife and nature. When it comes to things like the local nature recovery strategy and nature recovery networks, these are our core areas which we want to actually build these networks from. So we want to try and assess the condition of these sites and understand their kind of geographic spread across the district, and get a feel for what sort of role they could play in nature's recovery as we go forward. Water quality is another interesting component, given the kind of interesting history of Somerset and its waterways and the hydrological kind of function of the whole county. Water is a very important component and forms a core part of many of the habitats that we find, whether it's sort of fen, marsh and swamp habitats over the Avalon marshes or the huge kind of intertidal areas such as Bridgewater Bay. There's a large variety, so I've tried to pull some information from the Environment Agency about water quality. And the other component, which I'm still working on, is actually land cover change. So trying to understand how different land cover types have changed over time. So whether certain habitat types have been converted into urban areas, how much arable farmland we have, improved grassland, that kind of thing. But the main things I'm going to present are these first two, designated sites and water quality today. But land cover change will also be present in the report as we go forward. Next slide, please. So this is a panel plot which actually just shows where our designated sites are within Sedgemoor and those that actually border the district too. So actually quite fortunate in that we have a good spread of different designated sites. Two main areas of outstanding natural beauty, the Quantocks to the southwest and the Mendips to the northeast. These are very important sites as they're kind of geographically distinct, typically good habitat for wildlife, but also interesting areas for people to visit. So important when it comes to the engagement of people and nature. We have Ramsar sites, which are important for wetland birds, so quite a large portion of the coastline there, but also some inland areas to the southeast. National nature reserves are typically managed by organisations such as Natural England and the Environment Agency. And we have, again, Bridgewater Bay as a large focus for National Nature Reserve status, but also some smaller reserves heading through the Huntsville River in the centre of the district over to the east. We have very few local nature reserves, only two kind of blobs on the map in the bottom left there. And special areas of conservation and special protected areas are kind of large-scale designations for important habitats that overlap many of the other designations that we have. But one that I want to focus on is SSSIs, so that's sites of special scientific interest. Next slide, please. So SSSIs are typically, when designated, are typically pristine and prime habitat. So they're meant to be an exemplar of a particular environment or ecosystem. And as you can see from this map on the right, we have, again, quite a good spread of this designation across Sedgemoor. But unfortunately, we have a huge variety in the condition of these SSSIs. So SSIs are assessed normally by staff at Natural England and assessed for their quality of habitat. This isn't a regular process, it's quite ad hoc as and when resources are available or a particular scenario arises in which an assessment is needed. And it's also worth noting the size of the Bridgewater Bay SSI, which is mainly in favourable condition, but something to note there is that the last assessment of that big chunk was in 2010. So quite a few of these assessments are out of date. Some of the unfavourable assessments over to the east, especially near the Avalon Marshes, for example, are much more recent and linked to the issues that we have in Somerset with water quality and phosphate specifically. Next slide, please. So designated sites. Yep, so we're still looking at SSIs here. And we've got two graphs. And on the left-hand side, we've got all of those SSIs. On the y-axis, we have the total area of those SSIs across Sedgemoor. And on the x-axis, we have their condition, which is indicated by the colour of the bar. So you can see by area the kind of scales we're looking at in terms of the condition of the landscape for these particular units of land. Now, Bridgewater Bay, as I said, is a very dominant SSI over on the west coast. So if we were to take that out and actually look at this graph on the right-hand side, this is a bit more of a realistic look at SSIs within Bridgewater that cover a much broader variety of habitat rather than that huge swath of intertidal area, which hasn't been assessed for over a decade. And unfortunately, we have many sites that are in an unfavourable and declining condition. And this is quite troubling, going back to what I said about SSIs, that they should be in a prime example of pristine habitat and these kind of core areas that we should be building from for nature's recovery. It's quite an issue and something that needs to be addressed. Next slide, please. So we're moving on to water quality now. So that's what I was talking about, Somerset's waterways. And I've been using some data from the Environment Agency from their cycle 1 and 2 condition assessments of various catchments across Sedgemoor. Now we have about 23 catchments within the district that are monitored in this way, and they are defined across this kind of scale, which I've color coded here. So we move from high to bad, and this is all relating to ecological status. The Environment Agency do monitor other aspects of water quality, such as looking for heavy metals, for example, and chemical testing. But for this, given it's a kind of state of nature approach, I think the ecological assessment is a good overall indicator of water quality for nature. So I'm just going to show you a graph in a minute where it actually takes these definitions and these status assessments and shows you how the 23 catchments in Sedgemoor are faring. Next slide, please. So this graph shows the data that's available, as I said, from the cycle 1 and 2 Environment Agency assessments over time. So they started this form of monitoring in 2009 and currently have results up to 2019. And this is what's showed on the x-axis. And then on the y-axis, we have what we call a stacked bar graph here, where the colours are made up with the number of catchments that fall within each of those categories. So as we can see, we've been getting kind of a growing number of catchments falling within the moderate category. But unfortunately, as of 2019, 0 out of 23 of those catchments are in a good quality for ecological and ecological status. So that's not necessarily good for wildlife or sort of any habitats that kind of depend on good water quality and good hydrological functioning within those areas. So this is a kind of a broad overview of some of the work I've been doing on landscapes and habitats. And now I'm going to move over to pass over to Ellen, who's going to talk about some of the species data.
Hello, next slide, please. So this is just a brief overview of some of the species data that we've got. So the data that we have with the company is from 1820 all the way to 2020, so it spans about 200 years. So it's a long time, and the number of data entries we had was 520,000. So it's a lot of data entries to get through. I've been putting it through some coding in R just to make sure that the data that we are using is data that is usable, so actually important, and it's not data that says that nothing's there, or that there's no dates, so all the data that we've been using, we've made sure that it's dated to the right time, has a location, has a scientific name for the species that it's found. And doing that, I had to clean out quite a few lots of data. So the map just shows where more of the data has come from and where there's less data. So the yellow areas is where most of the data has come from, and where we had more surveys and data entries. And then obviously if there's white, then there's been no data, and then the darker the color is, there's less data has come out of that area as well. So from the data, we found 43 different taxon groups, the main ones being birds, flowering plants, terrestrial mammals, moths and butterflies. So they were the top taxon groups, and they're the ones that we've worked mostly with. There's just over 7,000 species that have been recorded across Sedgemoor over the 200-year period, with 162 of those species being on the red list. So these are critically endangered or endangered species that are of focus and at threat to becoming extinct. And then we also found 33 different invasive species throughout Sedgemoor. So these are species that aren't from, I guess, the UK and shouldn't necessarily be here and are at detriment to the local nature in Sedgemoor. We also have 909 species in Sedgemoor that are notable to the county, so are significant to Sedgemoor in terms of their importance overall across the country, but also to Sedgemoor specific, the land type and the area of Sedgemoor. Next slide, please. So we had lots of data, but unfortunately there was some data issues that we had. So in terms of the number of species, there's over 7,000 species, but actually over 4,500 of those species had 10 or less data entries, and scientifically we can't draw anything from any of those species. There's not enough data to draw any conclusions for a large number of the species that we wanted to, or that are significant to find out about. We only had 60 species that had over 1,000 data entries. So we had a very limited number of species that we can actually make an assessment on over the years that is significant for Sedgemoor anyway. So as you can see on the graph at the bottom here, so this was done on great crested newts, and although there is still a significant number of data entries so that each year we can do something, there's large gaps that we don't know how that fits in to the whole population trend as a whole, so we can't draw any conclusions about population trends over a long period of time because we're missing some data. But we did want to highlight that just because the data isn't there, it doesn't mean that it's not happening. So just because we can't draw any conclusions from it or can't analyze the data doesn't mean that there isn't any issues that are still happening or isn't any species decline. Next slide, please. So one of the most important species that we found we had enough data on was the Hazel Dormouse. So this is a county notable species and is also a red listed species. So it's really important that this monitoring is going on. So the graph here shows the median number of individuals that have been seen, and then it's per survey per year. So based on how many surveys were done each year, it's the average number of dormouse that was cited for each survey. So as you can see, it's a lot higher around 1990 than it is at the moment, and has decreased and plateaued over the last couple of years, even though there's lots of surveys. And a next slide, please. So that's important, as the next maps here shows the number of surveys that have happened throughout the last 30 years. So actually there has been more surveys going on in a larger amount of space, but the number of dormouse that we're seeing isn't increasing. So there's more work being done to find them, but they're not being found, which we can draw from that there may be some negative population trends over the years, that if we can't find the species, even though we're doing larger and more surveys, then there's some issues. The Hazel Dormouse was the main species that we have found anything with that we can do, because we were struggling with data entries. Next slide, please. The next interesting one was on the invasive species. As I'd mentioned before, there was 33 different invasive species that we found. And these maps here again show over 10-year period from the last 30 years, how many times that the invasive species have been found and in the surveys. So most recently in the last 10 years, there's been more species, more of them found in a larger area across Sedgemoor. And this is really important because the more of these invasive species are found and the larger they're spread, it's causing more issues for the native species that we have. I think most people will know about grey squirrels and red squirrels and the issues with those as well. So this is what this is about. So the invasive species, they need to be tackled, otherwise they're going to start becoming detrimental towards all the native species in Sedgemoor, and Sedgemoor is going to lose some important species and the county notable species as well. Next slide, please. I'm just going to hand off to Leon to do a little bit more of a summary.
Thanks, Ellen. So one of the key findings that we've come to from doing this work, and it was kind of almost a known quantity before we started, is that random intermittent surveys make it really difficult to do trend analysis. And this isn't a local problem, this isn't an issue for Somerset, this is a UK-wide known issue, and certainly within the scientific community it's well understood. There was a recent study that came out from Sussex University and the Mammal Society looking at weasel populations. And Fraser Coomer, who's head of research for Mammal Society, is also a professor at the university there. They spent 2 years collating as much data and doing some very sophisticated statistical analysis on data sets that they could acquire, just to kind of reach the point where they could say something about weasels. So there are ways in which we can look at trends or try to look at trends, but they take a lot of resource and effort to actually get to those points. And the same can be said about monitoring methods as well. So they really need to be tailored to the question that needs to be answered. Record centres such as ourselves over the years have been collecting presence and absence data. This has been really important for dealing with the legislation that goes around planning. Developments need to know where protected species are. So there's been a lot of focus on that, but they haven't really needed to know how many of these individuals there are, or we've not been looking at important species and counting their populations in the same locations over time consistently for the last 30 years. So it can be very difficult. And those kind of surveys, it's easy to understand why they've not been done. It's very resource intensive. There's a lot of human resource that goes into it. They can be financially expensive. So, you know, it's not a shock to think that those kind of surveys haven't been done. But if we need to answer those questions, then that's something that might need to be considered. And they need to be multi-year as well. So if we do go down the route of trying to do trend analysis on species, it needs to be a continuing process year on year, because we've got to account for things like population fluctuations. There's micro trends in amongst species. If we're looking at them, they'll boom and bust, they'll go up and down depending on their food supply and things like that. So there's a lot of things to consider, and it needs to be long term. Next slide, please. Thank you. So another thing to consider as well, although our records go back sort of 200 years, we're talking about 1 or 2 individual records that we have. And looking at the bigger picture, looking at UK studies and things like that, such as the plant life, looking at species-rich grasslands, the majority of the environmental damage that's happened in the UK, and that includes Sedgemoor and includes Somerset, has happened pre-record. So, you know, we had a lot of planning and development and environmental legislation that came out in the late 80s and the early 90s that were kind of introduced to help tackle some of the ecological damage that was going on. Similarly to how British coastlines, once upon a time, it was quite difficult to swim in the sea where it could be quite polluted. There was a lot of effort within the EU to kind of bring about change and clean up our waterways. The same thing happened in the terrestrial environment. And it's really important to remember that just because we don't have the information to hand, it doesn't mean it hasn't happened. It just means that we don't have the right information to be able to describe it. Collectively, we know it's happening. Like I say, because these very specialised types of surveys haven't been done, it just means that we've not been asking the right questions over time to actually be able to turn around and definitively say right now what's happening in Sedgemoor. Habitat data still provides a much more robust way of highlighting the ecological damage compared to the species data that we have at the moment. And we can see, even from like the land cover change work that we've done, it's only a small percentage, but Sedgemoor is still losing its natural habitats to urbanisation and agriculture. So over the last 25 years from the CEH land cover data, there was about 4% reduction in grassland habitats. Some of that went to woodland creation, a very small amount. The majority went to urbanisation and agriculture. So Plant Life talked about how we've already lost about 97% of our species-rich grasslands within the UK. Sedgemoor, the kind of the topography of and the landscape would have meant that a lot of the land would have been species-rich grassland once upon a time. So we'd already lost a lot of our grasslands before we started monitoring through remote sensing techniques, and there's still been small amounts of erosion of that since then. And the other thing we can kind of derive from it as well is that if habitats are being damaged, degraded and fragmented, which we know is happening, then we know that the scientific research tells us that species will suffer. They become isolated, it's difficult for them to move about. And this is very much what the local nature partnership and the local nature recovery strategy is about. It's a known problem. We are trying to reconnect the landscape to kind of reduce this fragmentation and help species move. In light of climate change as well, because we don't know what's going to happen to our habitats. They will likely change as a result of rising temperatures and things like that. So we really need to do what we can to help the species that will suffer as a result of climate change move to the areas of the country that they need to get to. And so I think that's it. Thank you. So yes, any questions?
Sorry, hang on. Sorry, I'm trying to unmute myself, but I got booted off the system and I'm back on again now, but mute's a bit slow. So any questions at all? I can see I don't know if there's anybody else that registered to ask to speak, so I will go with committee members first. So Councillor Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you for that update. Very insightful with what we've seen so far. I have a couple of questions which I don't know if you'll be able to answer. One of them, I was just a bit surprised on the absence of data, and so I just wondered who's responsible for all that for the data entry. Just out of interest, really. And is there any requirement, like a legal requirement, for that sort of to be done regularly, or is that just do it if you want sort of thing? And the other question was, in terms of Sedgemoor losing the natural habitat to urbanisation and agriculture, I wondered, is the evidence for that sort of stuff going to come in when you present your full report at the end of the month? Just wondering. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. So Somerset Environmental Record Centre, we've been collating the data on behalf of the county since 1980.
We're losing you, Leon.
Have the best available. Oh,
sorry.
am I back?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So there's a legal requirement for planning authorities to use the best available data. And this is what I was talking about during the presentation. There's never been a statutory requirement to actually collect trend analysis data. We've been collecting presence and absence data, which is what's been required to fulfill planning obligations. But we're now being asked questions that the data doesn't fit for. So it's not a question of we've not been collecting the right data over those last 30 years. It's just the question was different, and now we're being asked something else. So everybody's been fulfilling their obligation, but we're now at a point where suddenly we need to find out different answers, but we haven't prepared for that. So I hope that answers that part of the question. And then, yes, to come to the second part, the CEH data that talks about the loss of habitat will be included in the CEH data within the final report. And we were going to do our own land cover assessment, but the CEH specifically say, don't do that, do all assessment based on their own methodology so that it's consistent throughout the country. So we've used what the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology have given us.
Okay, Diego.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Thank you. Leon, can I ask you as well? You mentioned on the slide that there are only 2 local nature reserves. How does that compare with other areas? Is that quite a common thing?
It's a very good question, and I don't have the answer for that right now. So what I will say is, as we've been doing this work for Sedgemoor and Somerset West, and because the state of nature is going to be so fundamentally important for Somerset, we're actually keeping Ellen on for the next 12 months. So we're reinvesting money into doing this work so that we can actually finish doing the different districts before the end of the year and look at the county as a whole. Because it's so fundamentally important that we do get this full picture for everywhere in Somerset. And that's the sort of thing that, you know, hopefully a few months down the line we'll be able to answer quite clearly and illustratively as well.
Okay, thank you. And one quick question for Ellen, just before I hand over to Councillor Keane. I've seen she's got a hand up. It was just for clarity, really, for those that may not know, taxon groups. Can you just explain what that is?
Yes, sorry. As I was saying it, I thought maybe should have explained. So it's just the different, I guess, types of animals that you can have. They're all in different groups and defined by how they are, where they live, the types of animals. So birds is one. The different insects are split up into lots of different taxonomic groups. So you've got moths and dragonflies and butterflies are all different taxon groups, different beetles as well. You've got amphibians and reptiles. It's just the classes of each animal, essentially.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. Councillor Keane, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. That was an excellent presentation, but frightening. And I think everyone needs to be frightened. Last week at the carbon literacy training day, the tutor made great emphasis on nature's own timetable in relation to the parts where you say there are perhaps damage. There is so much interdependency amongst all the species, large and small, some microscopic, we don't even know exist. We can't even pronounce the names of. But if nature's, and she gave the example of if certain things that we see appear earlier, far earlier than is traditional, then it could be that all the microscopic species that depend on that little chain, one after the another, they could be almost wiped out in one season. And with their lifespan being less than a season or less than a year, there's no second chance. Is there any way you could enlarge upon that? Thank you.
Did you want me to?
If you could, Leon, if you're able to. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so this is one of the issues around climate change, is that temperature, so most species have their minimum and maximum limits when it comes to things like temperature and all of the kind of associated microclimates that run with temperature, humidity, for example, things like that. So if you push a species out of its range through temperature change, then it either has to move or it dies. It suffers, essentially. I think a great example of what you're kind of describing on a larger species is the adder. So we have adders within Somerset. Typically, they're in more upland environments, and they're one of the species within the UK that have been having to go higher and higher within their kind of hillside ranges to stay within their temperature band. And at some point, the temperatures within Somerset, for example, will reach a point where adders have got nowhere else to go because our hillsides aren't exactly high. So they run out of that height to escape to. As you've rightly said, you know, there's a lot of microbiota within soils and things like that. It's a bit of an unknown quantity as to how climate change is going to affect it, but it very well could. And especially if you don't have a fully healthy functioning soil ecosystem to begin with, then issues can be exacerbated. Essentially, there's less room for that maneuverability within the diversity to adapt. Going macro again, this is what the nature recovery strategy is about. So, you know, it's very much about trying to enable species to move should they need to move, and the connectivity and things like that, because it is exactly as you've said, you know, you push species to the limits of their ranges and they have to go elsewhere. We're generally finding from state of nature reports that generalists are doing okay, species-wise, what we would consider generalists, so they're not very specialised. Immobile generalists, so they might be a generalist, but they don't have a lot of range of movement, they're suffering, and also specialist species are suffering because the underlying habitats at which they exist on are also suffering.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. I was going to wrap up that.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, Leon. Catherine, you had your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to add to what Leon was saying earlier. So just in case councillors weren't aware of the Environment Act that achieved rural assent last year. So this requires all local authorities to enhance and protect nature, wildlife. So we have a duty to do that. Also, there are local nature partnerships that are being set up to deliver the local nature recovery strategies, which are being set up across the country. So we are all involved in that and working with a number of different partners. So this is why it's becoming so important, because as part of this local nature recovery strategy, we need to understand the status of nature in our county. This is really important because the aim is to link up and work strategically across the UK to build networks of across the UK of wildlife corridors. So these are the nature recovery networks. So this is why it's so important now, and why Leon touched on it in the presentation.
Thank you, Catherine. Are there any more questions at all from members? Yeah, Councillor Scott.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah. I think you said the data that you had was sort of quite out of date, and it's going to be difficult to actually, you know, bring that sort of into the current day. I guess you're working with all the, you know, wildlife groups who are able to help you. What is the actual the last known record that you have, the date, and how long do you think it will actually take you to recover some more information?
So I think there might be a little bit of misunderstanding here, because our species data is up to date. So we've got pretty much everything that we've had handed in up to 2021. There's still some other group data that, so the specialist group, you know, depends on when they send it in to us. But consultancy data is always coming in, and then obviously data from wildlife trusts and things like that. Where some of the data was out of date is actually on the site data relating to things like triple SIs. That's completely out of our hands. That's with Natural England to do the assessments. And to be fair to Natural England, they've been struggling for years to try and keep up, because it takes a lot of effort to go out to these sites. They're quite large, typically habitat complex sites. And so their resource issues there. They've not been able to do them on a regular 10-year rotation. I mean, ideally, we'd be looking at habitats once every 5 years just to keep an eye on them and make sure that they're in the correct condition. It's just no one's got the resource to do that, financial resource, I should say. So habitats wise, some of it is out of date, out of our hands, nothing we can do about that. Species data, we try to keep up to date as possible.
Great, thank you. Is that okay, Liz?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that clarifies that. Thank you.
I'll take a last quick one, please, Diego.
Thank you. I should have asked this earlier, but I didn't see. I forgot I'd written it down. It was just out of interest, really, on the invasive species part, which Ellen spoke of. I only wondered, out of interest, can you give me an example of how you tackle the threat that invasive species are putting in our environment? Just one small example, because I have no idea how you do that.
This is one of the problems with invasive species. They're immensely difficult to tackle. So many years ago, I worked in the conservation department for a water company, and we'd got something called Crassula helmsii, which had come over from New Zealand or Australia, and it was taking over our waterways, and it just absolutely blankets wetlands, and it pushes out native flora, so plants and things like that. We don't know what its effect is on invertebrates. Hugely difficult. You only need a tiny fragment for it to reproduce, and it can grow at an incredibly quick rate. So it's just huge amounts of money. I mean, invasive species are globally one of the biggest drivers of biodiversity loss. And I think it costs, at the moment, it costs the UK multiple billions of pounds to try and tackle invasive species. Many of them are aquatic. They can be dispersed through rivers and things like that. So again, things like floating pennywort, small fragment breaks off, floats down river, finds its home, takes over. It's some of them are almost impossible to deal with. You know, we've got things like zebra mussels. They're very problematic in waterways. American crayfish, very problematic. Grey squirrel. The only thing I could recommend for them is for everybody to eat them. And as a vegetarian, that's kind of not really my normal MO, but they're one of the few invasive species where that would probably be the only way in which humans could control them, as if we put them on the menu. They're just so difficult, and this is why they're problematic.
If I can also add to that, onto that as well, although they're difficult to tackle, that will help with just reducing the number of them. Is obviously just so if it's plants and things like the Japanese knotweed, taking them out and doing certain surveys, but getting volunteers to remove species if they can, but also once more is done to make the habitats suitable for native species, then that'll increase the number of native species and push out the invasive species. At the moment, the habitats are the invasive species are taking up more space because the habitats are more suitable for them. So it's tackling the habitats in the areas is going to be an important part of pushing out the invasive species.
Thank you, Ellen. Very helpful. Liz, was that a legacy hand?
No, I was going to say is as a member of the
keep it brief if possible.
Yes, sorry.
This one,
It
no,
was-
thank you.
Yeah, it was to do with the invasive species, really. The Drainage Board does sort of keep an eye out for a lot of the waterway issues. So they're helping. So I guess all the agencies do look out for them.
Thank you. Great. At this point in time, I think we need to look at where we go. Thank you so much for bringing the report to us today with the progress of where you are. Obviously, I acknowledge that it's not finalised yet and you have until the end of March. What I would like to do, if possible, is look at bringing this back to the next committee meeting, which will be in June. That should hopefully allow enough time for the report to be finalised. And I'd like to suggest, if committee members are in agreement, we had set up a working group before for looking at the wording and the recommendation for declaring an ecological emergency in Sedgemoor, if that is what is needed. And I would suggest that we do that again and liaise, if it be Catherine, yourself with Christy, liaising with the working group, perhaps with Councillor Keane, to look at that before, so that we bring a report to the next committee meeting in June with some options for the committee to look at. Does that sound like a sensible way forward for everyone?
Yeah,
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Yes.
Well, in that case, thank you very much to Catherine, to Pete, to Leon, to Ellen, to James. Very interesting. And thank you for your work you've done so far. Thank you.
Cool. Cheers. Goodbye.
If you want to
Thank
stay for the rest of the meeting, you're welcome to. Okay.
Perfect.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you, everyone. Going to move on to item 7 now. This is a quarterly update on the Climate Emergency Joint Consultation Panel. We're going to receive a verbal update on this. I'm going to introduce Sue Tomlinson. Sue is the Climate Change Programme Manager for Somerset Western Taunton, who's going to present this item. Okay, over to you, Sue.
Sorry, Councillor Bruce, it's actually me that's going to present, but I'm going to be, no, sorry, I should have made that clear. And Sue, I'm sure, will be right there beside me as we work together very closely. So thank you. Hello, members. Nice to see you this afternoon. So I'm here to give you an update on where we are with the joint consultation panel. So just by way of a quick reminder, a quick refresh. In June 2021, we brought a paper to Council Executive with a proposal to form a partnership with Somerset Western Taunton to deliver on our climate change strategy and action plan. And Sue and I have been working very closely together. Sue is the programme manager over in Somerset Western Taunton, and myself as a strategic manager here in Sedgemoor to deliver on our strategy work and to form a team to be able to work on the projects that we currently have in our action plan. The action plan, the Sedgemoor action plan, is a large and ambitious plan with lots of actions in it, and some of those actions are being delivered by colleagues across the council. However, we did recognise that there were a large number of projects where we didn't have the resource to drive them forward. So that was where we felt that there were benefits in forming our partnership and creating a pool of resource where we could drive forward some of the project work. So in forming that partnership, we set a governance structure, and I'm just going to see if I can share my screen without too much problem, she says, because this might illustrate to you. Hopefully you can see in front of you the Climate Change Joint Delivery Partnership Governance. Just a nod would be great. Lovely. And so if you can see it clearly enough, you'll see this orange is me here, and this green in the middle is Sue. We have the assistant director at Somerset Western Taunton who line manages Sue, and the project team, which is the resource that we've put together, which incidentally Catherine Church, who you've just been presented by, is part of that delivery team. So Sue and I meet as part of a partnership review within that governance structure. And just down here at the bottom of these 3 boxes, you'll see there's a joint consultation panel. So this joint consultation panel is what I've come to just give you an update on. It's made up of the 2 portfolio holders across the 2 councils, who are obviously Councillor Janet Keane and Councillor Dixie Darch for Somerset Western Taunton, and they share the chairing of that that panel between them. There are four, I think actually there's 3 nominated members from each local authority sitting on that. No, sorry, it is right, it's 4. So 2 from each local authority. So the 2 that represent Sedgemoor are Councillor Hilary Bruce and Councillor Charlie Riches. The panel has now met twice. I'll just stop sharing this screen because you don't need to see that anymore. The panel has met twice. The first meeting was really to get to know each other, to sort of formulate the terms of reference, and to set our stall out really as we go forward. The second meeting, which was held recently, and I can't remember the date of it. Sue, was it in March?
It was in January.
January. Okay, so we met in January, and what we put forward to that particular meeting was a highlight report, so that members could see the activity that we were doing as our partnership. So if you remember, I'll just go back to the fact that we've got a large action plan, but only a proportion of that is being dealt with as part of our partnership work. So what we offered to members at the meeting was a highlight report that will be what we will put forward every quarter, and I suggest will probably come forward to Scrutiny quarterly as part of this update. And basically it gives an update on the activity, the projects that are being worked on, who's managing those projects, and the activity that's been done to date. At the meeting, we recognised that as a first draft, it needed a little bit of work doing to it. So Sue and I have gone away and done that work with another one of our officers, Andrew Randall, who works across our 2 authorities. And we now have a final version which relates to that January meeting. So the information in the highlight report is already 2 months old as it comes to you. We will have a refreshed report ready for our next meeting. Again, I'll just quickly share to show you. Hopefully you can see the Excel spreadsheet in front of you. There are 99 lines in this, so I'm not proposing to go through them one by one today with you, but what I wanted to just do is show you the type of information that you'll be looking at when you receive this. So we've broken it down into projects that are.
Can I
Sorry,
just a moment? Could you possibly enlarge the screen because it's really difficult to see? Can you enlarge the view of that? Zoom in. That's it.
How's that?
I think that's better.
A bit better?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I'll just stick with just showing you, we've obviously highlighted what the project is and who the project manager is. We've also put which council it's in relation to, and as I say, an update on where we are as of the quarter that took us up to our January meeting. What I propose to do, Chair, is circulate this with the minutes of the meeting so that members can have a look in detail, and perhaps if there are any questions arising, any queries, they can by all means get in touch with me or through their committee member on the consultation panel, feed that back to the next panel meeting. That was really what I wanted to cover with you today. Sue, as I say, is on the call with me, so I will just invite Sue if she'd like to add anything, because I'm renowned for missing things out. Sue, is there anything you'd like to say?
I think you've covered it all, Christy, but yeah, so when you do read this, it is dated for January. The meeting was on the 24th of January, so our project officers were completing it a couple of weeks beforehand. The next meeting is towards the end of April. I think it's the 25th of April, so there will be a fresh version prepared for that meeting. I don't think there's anything else to add in there. We produced the highlight report, as Christy said, for the first time in January. The feedback that we got was generally good because it was nice and straightforward and easy to understand the highlight report. It was just making sure that where we had projects that were going across both councils and the updates were coming from different project managers, that the wording matched. So we've just had to tweak the wording really. Hopefully you'll find the report okay when you read it.
Thank you very much. Can
Chair.
I just ask one thing? So this report that we're going to receive now following the meeting today is obviously from January, so like you said, it's 2 months old.
Yeah.
When you have the next report at the end of April after the next meeting, is it possible for that to be circulated in good time before the June meeting? Because we'll have another update from you in June. But I think it's important the members get a chance to have a look at the most recent report in good time, so that if there's any issues, they can prepare questions for you before you come to the update, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Certainly, and I think by way of response, you'll remember, Hilary, that there were some questions at the consultation panel about whether this report could be shared more widely anyway after that meeting. And so now we've had that opportunity to review the content and to check that it is fit for purpose. We would be happy after the consultation panel that the detail is shared in any case with whoever the members of the consultation panel feel they want to share it with. So we can certainly make sure that it's put forward to scrutiny through yourself in any case.
That's right. Can I just clarify then, the report that we're going to receive now that was from January, is that okay for members to share more widely, or that's just for the scrutiny committee members?
No, we've discussed that, Sue, haven't we? And we're happy for that to be shared more widely from this point.
So we're clear on that. That's fine.
Thank you
very much. Do members have any questions? Looks like you're going to go away lightly today.
Nice and easy.
That's brilliant. Thank you both very much for the update. We look forward to receiving the reports following the meeting today, and then the next one after the meeting at the end of April.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Very
Thanks,
much.
Sue.
Thank you. Okay, can I, if possible, just really, Andrew, for the record, going back to the item before, there was one thing I didn't clarify, I think, that the copy of the CERC report, when it's completed, does need to be circulated and distributed to members of the scrutiny committee, the final report. And then I would ask members to feed back any input through to their respective members of the working group. So the working group, just to remind members, was myself, Councillor Liz Scott and Councillor Phil Harvey, so cross-party working group. If any of the other members, so if Councillor Phil Harvey or Councillor Liz Scott is unable or does not want to be on the working group anymore, I'm quite happy for another member from their group to take their place, but we do need to know that. So I just wanted to clarify for the record, Andrew, who the working group is, and that the CERC report will be circulated to all members of the committee so that they can feed in through their respective members of the working group. Okay, thank you.
Yep, that's fine, and I'll reflect that in the summary in the minutes when that comes through, so that it's clear that it's Councillor Bruce, Scott and Harvey and Councillor King, so members are,
yes,
don't see anybody saying that they're still they're not willing to continue with that role, so we'll stick with that membership.
Perfect, just thought it was important to clarify. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to the next item, we are receiving an overview. This is item 8, receiving an overview of the progress of the planting of more trees initiative. So tree planting, which we have with us today, Anna Mears, Climate Change Project Officer, who's going to present for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilary. I'll just share my screen and do a quick presentation, which basically just gives an overview of the progress on our tree planting over the last year, how it's gone, feedback that we've had, and what our plans for the future are. So I'll start with the tree fund. So we ran 2 rounds of the tree fund. The first one started in summer last year, and this was off the back of the tree fund that was kind of a seed fund that was announced, I think, in 2019 in November, which was meant to be a seed fund that businesses would sort of pay into, and we would then use it in Sedgemoor to plant trees, and we were hoping to grow it a lot, but COVID changed things quite a lot. We didn't think it was appropriate to ask businesses to pay into the fund. So, and with Unitary as well, we kind of just wanted to get on and get some trees in the ground. So we used the £5,000 to, we basically allowed parishes to let us know what kind of trees they wanted. We gave them a sort of menu of trees. We gave them advice on planting and maintenance. The parishes were the ones to do the planting. They were the ones to look after the trees, and all we did was provide the trees in the first place. with the nursery that we usually, the Clean Surroundings use anyway. So we try to keep it sort of simple, sort of low admin, just to get trees in the ground and get parishes involved. I think that's everything about how it worked. It was a really simple application form, so parishes just let us know where they were going to plant the trees. Hopefully it was on their own land, and if it wasn't, did they have permission to plant there, and what number and species they wanted. It's also worth noting that we suggested that parishes with more electors could ask for more money and smaller parishes would ask for less money, but it was sort of a two-tier system, and again kept very simple. Went on from summer last year. We needed to get the sort of tree order in quite early so that trees could be ordered in time, and there's a couple of month delay between ordering the trees and then being delivered. We wanted the trees to be delivered in time for planting during National Tree Week, which is at the end of November, start of December, which sort of allowed for an opportunity for a bit of extra PR, more volunteer engagement. There was a lot of information at the time and a lot of sort of other schemes about National Tree Week, so volunteers could find information about planting trees, and there's quite a lot of hype at the time, so we kind of went off the back of that to get parishes, sort of allow them to get more help planting their trees as well. And by the end of the first round of the Tree Fund, we had 296 trees planted, and that was a range of whips, so sort of some councils asked for, it was up to 150 whips, £1 per whip, or a few sort of more well-established trees. And in the first round, 20 parishes participated. In the second round, we did a very similar system. This time, parishes couldn't ask for which species they wanted because it was quite late, and there wasn't basically that much stock left. So, similar, that it needed to be publicly accessible land, and they needed to do the planting, they needed to take care of the trees, we just provided the trees. We decided to run the second round quite sort of at the last minute. We hadn't really intended to do it, but we still had a bit of money left over from the first round. And we realised that we wanted to do something around the Queen's Green Canopy, which is this initiative to plant trees to commemorate the Jubilee this year. I think there's a lot of other sort of initiatives around this, so we kind of incorporated this with the money that we had left over, and it was a very similar timeline to the first round as well. And overall, we had 339 trees in the second round, and a lot more oaks this time, which is a good thing because oaks are more likely to survive. They last for longer. It's more of a sort of long-term commitment. They last for more generations. So we had a really good, really good engagement in the second one, with 25 parishes participating this time. That's everything I need to say about that. So the community involvement was quite high. Lots of parishes were able to get contractors to come and help them collect the trees. There didn't seem to be issues with getting volunteers involved. I think a lot of the parishes used sort of clerks and councillors to help plant the trees. I think it really helped that we did do it around National Tree Week, the first round, because people were quite interested in planting trees anyway. I haven't really heard so much back from the second round yet, because we only had the trees collected about 2 weeks ago from Clean Surroundings, and so I haven't had pictures back yet, but we've sort of said both times, please send pictures of you and your volunteers planting the trees, and we'd like to see them in place, and we'd like to see people getting involved, which helps with press release and things like that. So I'm waiting to hear back from councils about the Queen's Green Canopy. I think a lot of them are waiting until around now. I think it's there's a day in early March, I can't remember which date it is, it's like the 70th day of the Queen's 70th year, that's the day that we're going to plant the trees. So hopefully we'll get loads of pictures of volunteers planting trees on that. Feedback from the Tree Fund, we found that some parishes didn't actually have land that they could plant in. And I think maybe something that we could think about in the future, if we were to do this again, would be finding space, maybe Sedgemoor District Council space. We didn't really have time or as a resource to do this in this round, but that's something to think about in future rounds for parishes that don't have space to plant, because a lot of them were planting in sort of village hall gardens and on their own land, basically in churchyards. It's quite interesting that in the second round we had 25 participating parishes after just 20 in the first round. I think that could be because we'd done the first round and we had a press release and we had all these pictures and sort of made a big deal out of it. I think that parishes were then more aware of it. So when we came back and said, oh, we're doing it again, they were kind of ready to go and kind of knew about it already. What else? Something that's worth noting is that a lot of parishes wanted to get ornamental cherry trees, which were not really ideal. So we wanted to offer a variety of trees, and we'd rather they participate and have some trees rather than none at all. But I think it's really worth hammering home that larger trees that last a lot longer, like oaks, are much more worth planting. If you take good care of them at the beginning, then you kind of can just leave them to it. Whereas things like cherries, in 60 years' time or so, they'll need more care, or they just don't last that long. So they'll need taking down and replacing, and it's sort of less of a commitment for the future. We didn't actually have many parishes saying that they struggled to find volunteers, or any, in fact. So that leads me to believe that community engagement was quite good and people were quite interested in getting involved. There was a bit of a difficulty with collection in the first round. We just said, come and collect during this week. Lots of parishes didn't come during that week, or we didn't know when they were coming, and it was quite a lot of pressure on the Clean Surroundings team. So this time we just said, come on 1 or 2 days. Just a lot of them didn't manage to make it on, but all the trees are now gone, so that's great. And the second round, we only had a month for parishes to get back to us with their order, because it was quite a last-minute decision to do the tree fund again. Whereas if they had more time, then maybe we'd have had more parishes sort of having a meeting during that time, deciding where they want to plant, what they want, and then getting back to us. Other initiatives that have happened include the Local Authority Treescapes Fund. So this is a DEFRA funding for local authorities. I think there were 100 grants given worth up to 50,000, and this was just Clean Surroundings, just got on with it, got a load of trees and planted them themselves all across the area. The focus on this was on urban tree planting and getting trees alongside roads and on highways and things. And that was really successful. And also recently we've also done some planting in the Diamond Jubilee field, also as part of the Tree Belief, and that's something that Clean Surroundings have taken on themselves as well. And then thinking about plans for the future, we've been involved in the Trees Call to Action funding bid with the other district councils in Somerset, and also so it's being led by Somerset Local Nature Partnership. Also Exmoor National Park are involved, and we are providing, so we don't know yet whether we've put the bid through, but we haven't heard back yet, but we would be match funding £5,000 to support the planting of a Somerset forest and the creation of a Somerset tree strategy, which is in line with the climate emergency strategy that all the Somerset councils have signed up to already. So this is kind of a continuation of the tree planting focus of that strategy. And I think I will leave it there and answer any questions that you might have. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you. Can you hear me? It's not unmuted. No. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Anna. That was really, really interesting, and great to see that there's been some good uptake there on the scheme. So I'll open it up to questions from members first. So Councillor Rodriguez.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Anna, for that. Just a couple of questions, really. On the trees, the 296 and the 339, Was the full budget used for those, or was anything left over? And second one is the trees that were planted. Did you do like a mapping out exercise to see so that we know where they've all gone? And the third question, just for my clarity, the last slide you showed 450 trees from the Treescapes Fund. Is that in addition to the 600 odd as well? Yeah, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Sorry, I was making a note of your questions whilst you asked them because I know I'll forget. Thanks. Okay, so the full budget, yes, the full budget has now been used. So in the first round we used, I think the sum is 2,200. I can't remember off the top of my head. I've written it down somewhere. 2,290 in the first round. So less than half of the £5,000. So that's why we open up the second round. I don't actually have the final figure. Haven't seen but it's around the same. We were told that it was okay to go sort of a bit over, better to get more trees planted, but I don't have the final number, but I'll find that and get back to you. But it's not a lot over the 5,000. Mapping out exercise is a really, really good idea, and we haven't done that, but I think that's a great idea, and we could probably get on that because we've got all of the locations in this big old Excel spreadsheet, so that would be really nice to see. Sort of across the two funds, because a lot of the parishes, it was the same parishes from the first round who then got more trees in the second round. So probably see some areas where we got quite a lot, and then it'd be interesting to see the areas that we didn't engage with, and maybe look at targeting those moving forwards. That's a really good idea. And then the Treescapes one, that was in addition to the around 600 trees from the tree fund. We've also then planted 450 trees from the Treescapes funding.
Okay, thank you, Anna. That's very
So,
helpful.
and just one final one I forgot to ask. You know, with all the tree planting, I know that some parishes and town councils had their own sort of scheme that they went ahead and done lots of tree planting as well. I only wondered if there's any way, if you were to do a mapping exercise, if we could include the ones that the town and parishes have done in their own schemes, just to get a really big picture of what the district as a whole has been able to achieve.
That's a really good point because, I know that Bridgewater Town Council were doing their own fund, and it wouldn't be representative if we just had a big gap in Bridgewater, would it? So it's worth having a look at where the other, where other tree planting happened and be able to get a representative view. Good point.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think the mapping idea is a really good one. It's really kind of visual and just brings it home to people what's happened across the area. So I think that would be a really useful exercise to do. I'll save my questions for the end. Councillor Scott's got a question for you.
Yes, I was going to say congratulations, Anna. I know it's been quite a difficult task, and like you say, organising everything must have been a bit of a nightmare because everything's got to be done, hasn't it? My findings about engaging the parish, they were a bit reluctant to start with, because I think it was actually having the area of land to plant the trees or understanding, where they should be planting them. It's disappointing, like you say, that people haven't planted more larger species and longer lasting ones. But again, a lot of the comments I had was, they were concerned about the future maintenance. Obviously, if you plant an oak tree, it's going to grow very big. So you need to plant it in the right place. So if we're going to undertake this exercise again, we should be thinking about, engaging with people sooner rather than later so they can think and maybe investigate with landowners, because that was another item. I know there are certain landowners that would have trees on their land next to footpaths, and that has come around on the second tranche, where I think Axbridge had some extra trees, and they asked who wants trees, and several people said, yes, I'll have them. But if we had that information beforehand, it would be easier to distribute them. But otherwise, well done, good effort, thank you.
Thank you. I'm afraid people are not putting in the chat when they need to speak. I can see a hand. I have no idea who it was. So who's waiting to speak, please?
Yes, that's
Pearson, please go ahead. Thank you.
that's me. Yes, I'm the mystery hand chair. Yes, Anna, thank you for all your hard work on this. And you know, we talked about the tree fund. I mean, must be a couple of years ago now, didn't we? I wanted to echo Liz's words about the, you know, the parishes, and I think what we almost need to do is give parishes a staged approach. So, you know, they first of all they approach the landowners and say, look, we got some trees. Do you guys want some? Can you accommodate these? And then almost have an ordering system so that the parishes know where the trees are going to go and when they need to go in, so they can coordinate those before they arrive. You know, and that's just sort of feedback from my parishes here. I had a question about the tree fund, really, which is that obviously we're going into this unitary model and we're coming out of COVID. So is there a way that we can get this tree fund for local businesses back on the agenda and widely circulated, with a view to doing something after the elections when things sort of settle down a little bit, and another planting round in the autumn?
It's a good question. I know that so the other districts do also have similar schemes. Somerset West and Taunton have a big tree giveaway, which is really similar to what we did. South Somerset, again, yeah, thinking about what other councils have done. So I imagine there is probably a view to do some sort of joined up. We have been looking at the potential for, as we have the joined up approach with Somerset West and Taunton, and it's basically a replica of what they did. Can we deliver that together next time? But yeah, I think it's worth not forgetting the seed fund, the initial idea that we wanted to go with, that COVID has kind of changed. But yeah, worth, you know, considering as we go into unitary. But I don't really know. I don't think I can say about whether we'll do it or not, probably.
Okay, thank you. That might be something that Councillor Keane might be able to enlighten us on, in terms of whether there is more funding coming forwards for another scheme, and whether that's something that's imminent or not. I'm not sure. Councillor Keane?
I'm quite happy to ask for funds, but are you prepared to give me a flak jacket when I do so? Because this is not the only body that's been asking for an extra £5,000.
I know. I'll find one for you, Janet.
Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Godwin-Pearson? Still legacy hand?
Yeah, thank you. I was just frantically typing, can I come back on that? I think that just a note for Janet about the funding issue. I mean, I think the idea that businesses are approached to contribute some funding as part of their corporate and social responsibility is a good one, because then you know, businesses are looking for things to invest in, to do something good, to put something back into their communities, in the environment, and local is going to be better than trees in Madagascar, really. And all we really should be needing to do is coordinate it. You know, it should be something that can be funded.
Yeah, I agree. Councillor Keane, do you want to come back on that at all?
Thank you. I think that says it all.
Okay, brilliant.
But it doesn't stop us trying, just in case there may be a little bit of underspend in one place. Perhaps we could twitch it this way. One never knows.
All right, thank you. And I just have a couple of questions, really. You talked about issues with clean surroundings, Anna, in terms of parishes not turning up when they were supposed to. Did they have a single point of contact with clean surroundings for that?
Yeah, they generally went through Chris Cheviel, but because he's often off dealing with a fallen down tree somewhere, or not always based there, it was quite difficult to yeah, we had a lot of learnings from the first round, to be honest. Yes, in the first round, that's what we did. It was sort of, they come during this time, they tell Chris when they're going to arrive during the day, but he often had planned already to go somewhere else during the day, so it was bit difficult. So this time I went to Clean Surroundings for the day. I was the main contact, and I just sat and worked from the office in Colley Lane. And I'd said, tell me exactly when you're coming on this Tuesday or this Thursday, and that worked a lot better. There were still some that had forgotten to get some, because then you need to get someone like with a big car or with a truck or a big van or something. So it was also quite difficult to coordinate them collecting them, but it was definitely easier doing that than getting them all delivered and then getting the Clean Surrounds team to then go out and deliver them to parishes, because at least then we know, okay, it's in that individual's hands. I can sign and say, like, this is the person who said that they collected the trees, and then if they don't get planted, we can sort of follow up, or we know that we're not just leaving them somewhere and the roots will dry out or something like that. So yeah, second round definitely went a lot smoother than the first round.
Okay, and you also mentioned about the second scheme was on Sedgemoor land, so planting next to roads and things. In terms of highways and land that's under Somerset County Council ownership, has there been any kind of joint working with Somerset County for that, or has it just been on Sedgemoor's land?
Yeah, so that's a difficult one, because there's been kind of a change in the way things work. So initially, County had said, I think this was maybe a few years ago before the pandemic, that if we wanted to be planting trees, then we could go ahead and do it on county land and on highways. So that's when we initially put in the bid for the Treescapes funding. That was on the understanding that we would be able to do it on county land. Then they changed it and sort of said, okay, actually, we're not going to be able to do it on highways property. It's a bit more complicated. So we did need to find alternatives. So it wasn't as easy as just going onto any highway verges and just planting them, on the understanding that county had said that was fine. So there were more of them in parks and along footpaths. I think there were some on highway verges. I'm not sure. It was Chris Cheviel again, who was the officer in charge of the Treescapes funding, so he'll know exactly where all of them went. I think we have a list of that if you'd like to see where they went.
But it was a definite no from highways in the end. No discussions ongoing with being able to do that.
I think so. That's my last understanding on it. It's been a bit of a difficult conversation.
Okay, it's interesting to know. Councillor Keane, is that a legacy hand? Or?
No. Two things. The officer in Sedgemoor, if anyone has questions about anything to do with open spaces, it's now Scott Mason as his his task. And Anna's point, the county council on their land, I've been finding when private people have contacted me because of tree issues, either the replacement of or how to remove broken and dead trees, I've had a very mixed response. I think whoever is their protected trees officer needs to have some very specific information, and it would be on a case-by-case basis. I don't think there's an overall policy, at least that's not the impression I've been given.
Okay, thank you. That's a bit more investigations needed into that then. Okay. Wonderful. Anna, can I ask you the slides that you presented earlier on for this item? Would you mind circulating those to committee members as well? And I understand probably the second round's not long being completed, so I don't know whether press releases have been done for that yet, but obviously once mapping and everything is done, if you could get that to committee members as well, that'd be really interesting, I'm sure.
Yeah, will do.
Okay. If there are no other questions, I think we will close that, note the update. Thank you very much for your work, Anna. It's been very interesting to hear about it. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Okay, so going on to next item, last item of the agenda today, Community Scrutiny Work Programme. You have the attachment on the agenda, in the agenda pack. So we are looking at the next meeting is 13th of June. Hopefully we will have the CERC report completed and we'll come back to discuss the climate and ecological emergency declaration, the update, and animal welfare officers and dog wardens items. That's what we've got on the June one. And then we only have updates really for the partnership working for the climate and ecological emergency for future meetings. So does anybody have anything they'd like to add to the programme? Councillor Scott.
Sorry, I think that's a legacy hand.
Oh,
no, I haven't got anything else actually. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rodriguez.
Thanks, Chair. I didn't hear everything you said. It cut out a little bit. But did you mention anything to do with LGR? If
No.
not, is that something that we might be able to look at, especially the staffing, resourcing side, or is that not with us? Would that be corporate?
That would be corporate, I would think. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's difficult to know what we can really look at the Sedgemoor scrutiny. You know, with the local government reorganisation going on, it's something that each time, you know, I'm happy to consider requests that to go onto the work programme. I think it's something we need to review with the senior leadership team as to whether it still falls under our remit or is being scrutinised by another body at the moment while we go through the changes. But, I have one item that I'd like to add to the, and it crosses over to the ecological subjects that we've been discussing, and that's about, we talked about water quality in the CERC report, and I'm really concerned about the lack of water quality monitoring that's happening. I'd really like to have an update into whether our water quality is being monitored, when the last monitoring dates were, and which bodies of water are being monitored and what the quality is at the moment. Something a bit more specific. So I know it's quite a specific thing and it may already be dealt with under the ecological strategy, but I think it's worth a look. Would members be happy for me to go ahead and include that in the programme?
Yes.
Chairman?
Yes.
Councillor Keith?
The Internal Drainage Board also has their own ecologist, but of course, being Drainage Board, a lot of what that person does is related to waterways and the banks of the waterways, and the Internal Drainage Board is they actually maintain on behalf of landowners a huge acreage of land that is adjacent to waterways, and I have had a private briefing from their ecologists concerning all the invasive species that have been put into the waterways, inadvertently harming it by people who simply don't realise, but also the water quality itself and where the pollutants come from. If that is a topic that you feel would be helpful, then could I suggest that the Internal Drainage Board ecologist be invited as a guest speaker?
I think what we'll probably do to take it forward, Dave Coles in Environmental Health would be the officer that would deal with this, and I would ask him to invite the necessary people. So the Internal Drainage Board could be one of those people that he talks to and liaises with for his report. Certainly, yeah. Thank you. Councillor Caton?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering whether we could include seawater quality in that as well. It's been some years since Burnham sea quality of the seawater failed. It'd be interesting to know whether it's getting worse or whether it is improving. So if we could include that, that'd be very useful to us. Yeah, definitely. That was my intention. Is Burnham, Barrow, Breen. We've got the Brew, the Parrot. We've got King Sedgemoor Drain. We've got Huntsville. All of the waterways within Sedgemoor really. We need a full overview of those. So definitely include seawater for me. Yes. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. And we'd be looking to bring that forward for September, just looking at the workload that Dave Coles has at the moment. So we'd be aiming for a September meeting for that. Okay, great. Thank you. Any other input on the work programme from anybody? Wonderful. Well, we're 10 minutes over what I was aiming for today, but I think we've got through the main part of the work programme, and I'd like to declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much, everyone, for your attendance.